Bruce Lee, Chinese name Li Junfan, was born in San Francisco, USA to parents Li Hoi-chun and Grace Ho on November 27, 1940. According to the Chinese zodiac, Bruce Lee was born in both the hour and the year of the dragon, which, according to tradition, is a strong, fortuitous omen. In the Chinese zodiac, the hour of the dragon lies between 7 to 9 in the morning. Additionally, Bruce Lee was also born on the year of the Earth Dragon, which is the fifth animal in the order of the Chinese zodiac. Bruce Lee was born while his father, a Chinese opera star, was on a tour in America. To confuse any potentially unfriendly spirits, the child Bruce Lee was given a girl's name, Siphon, and one of his ears were pierced. His mother, Grace Lee, soon renamed her son Jun Fan, meaning return again, because she had an intuition that he would one day return to his birthplace. The name Bruce Lee came about because the supervising doctor nicknamed the boy Bruce and anglicized his family's name to Lee. His family wouldn't call him by the name Bruce Lee until he was a teenager. The Lee family moved back to Hong Kong in 1941 AD, which was then occupied by the Japanese. He had 3 older siblings and would later have a younger brother. He was introduced to the entertainment industry at an early age, as his father was an opera singer and a part-time actor. Growing up, Lee was a child actor who appeared in some 20 Chinese films. His first screen time came at a very young age and very adorable age of 3 months. Bruce Lee's grandfather was a pure-bred German Catholic. This actually worked against him, as his non-pure Chinese status prevented his acceptance into some of the most prominent kung fu schools back in 1950s. After attending Tak-sun School at an early age, Bruce enrolls at La Salle Primary School at the age of 12 on 1st January 1952 AD. The younger Bruce Lee began appearing in films as a child. As a teenager, he was taunted by British students for his Chinese background, and later he joined a street gang. Despite being raised in an affluent family, he was involved in a lot of street fights and gang rivalries, which used the need to be trained in martial arts. His first tutor was his father. Bruce Lee quotes his father as his first martial art instructor, teaching him a bit of Tai Chi when he was growing up. As a teenager, he took up with local gangs and began learning Kung Fu to better defend himself. At that time, he also started dance lessons, which further refined his footwork and balance. In 1958 AD, Bruce Lee won a dance competition back in Hong Kong. Bruce Lee is introduced to martial art by his father at a young age. His father taught him the fundamentals of Wushu Tai Chi Chuan. Bruce Lee started on his journey of learning martial art when he was 13, which is when he began learning Wing Chun from Yip Man. Yip Man was a traditionalist who didn't believe Wing Chun should be taught to Westerners. After a while, some students find out that Bruce Lee had a German ancestor and told Yip Man about it. Yip Man was okay with it because of his respect to Bruce Lee, but the other students demanded that Bruce Lee not be allowed to be trained there. So Bruce Lee decided to leave. His great-grandfather, Moses Hartog Bosman, was a Dutch Jewish businessman from Rotterdam who was once the Dutch consul to Hong Kong. Because of this, Bruce Lee had some Jewish and Dutch heritage on his family tree. When Bruce Lee was 17 years old, he won a boxing tournament organized by 12 Hong Kong schools, even though he had no formal training in boxing. He became the Hong Kong High School boxing champion, defeating all of his opponents, including British boxer Gary Elms. Bruce Lee took up the martial art as a teenager to defend himself from bullies and street fighters who picked on his side frame. After mastering many fight techniques, he joined a street gang himself. His continuous involvement in street fight led to his relocation to San Francisco in 1959-80, as his parents were deeply disturbed by his violent behavior and wanted him to leave Hong Kong to pursue a safer and healthier avenue. Bruce Lee's parents were distraught by his street fighting and run-ins with the police, and they sent him to live in the United States shortly after he turned 18. In April 1959 AD, at the age of 18, Bruce Lee moved to San Francisco to live with his older sister Agnes. Bruce Lee immigrated to United States right before he was 18 so he could claim American citizenship before the option lapsed, which he was able to do because he was born in San Francisco. After living for several months in San Francisco, Bruce Lee moves to Seattle to continue his high school education. He works as a live-in waiter for Ruby Chow. Her husband was a friend of Bruce Lee's father. Bruce begins teaching martial art in the US. He teaches his own style and he calls Jung Fang Kung Fu, which literally translated as Bruce Lee Kung Fu. It can be described as a modified variation of Wing Chun. He later opened his first martial arts school in Seattle, named the Jung Fang Kung Fu Institute. In 1960 AD, Bruce Lee completed his high school education and received his diploma from Edition Technical School in Seattle. In 1960 AD, Bruce Lee began dating a Japanese girl named Amy Sanbo and later on fell in love with her, asking for her hand in marriage on multiple occasions. However, the Japanese girl, Amy Sanbo, kept rejecting Bruce Lee's proposal for marriage, which ultimately led to their breakup during the summer of 1963 AD, right before Bruce Lee had to visit his family back in Hong Kong. Bruce Lee enrolls at the University of Washington. In 1962 AD, it is recorded by close friends and associates of Bruce Lee that he was challenged to a fight contest by a rival with a serious grudge against him. In 1962, Bruce Lee landed 15 punches, a kick, and knocked out his opponents in a fight that lasted only 11 seconds. In 1963 AD, Bruce Lee got rejected from the United States military after failing his pre-induction physical. According to his result, Bruce Lee was classified as 4F due to an undescended testicle and his poor eyesight, which required contact lenses to fix. Other test results also noted that Bruce Lee had a sinus disorder, which ultimately made him physically unfit to join and train with the United States military. He majored in drama, but also studied philosophy and psychology and various other subjects. He also got a job teaching the Wing Chun style of martial art that he had learned in Hong Kong to his fellow students and others. It was at the university that he met his future wife, Linda Emery. In the summer of 1963, a young woman by the name Linda Emery began taking Kung Fu lessons from Lee in Seattle. After a class, one day, Bruce Lee asked Linda out on a date. Adorably, he took her to the Seattle Space Needle. A year later, Bruce Lee and Linda were married, even though they knew their parents and society at large would not approve of their interracial marriage. Though his teaching, Bruce Lee met Linda Emery, whom he married in 1964 AD. Bruce Lee had opened his own martial arts school in Seattle. He and Linda soon moved to California, where Bruce Lee opened 2 more schools in Oakland and Los Angeles. He taught mostly a style he called Jeet Kune Do, or the way of intercepting fist. During that time, it was against the law to teach martial art to the people who do not have a Chinese origin. Due to this, in 1964 AD, Bruce Lee fought Wong Jackman, and according to the deal, if Bruce Lee lost, he would stop teaching Kung Fu to non-Chinese people. But Bruce Lee won that fight. In 1964 AD, Bruce Lee is invited to attend the Long Beach International Karate Championship in Long Beach, California. It was here that he gave a demonstration of some of his famous trainings and fighting technique, such as his 2-finger push-ups and the impressive 1-inch punch. Bruce Lee is invited to audition for one of his most famous TV roles. He successfully auditioned for the role of Kato for the popular action series The Green Hornet. Unfortunately, the series only lasted for one series, but Bruce Lee's popularity increased considerably. Bruce Lee dropped out of university and moves to Oakland to pursue his martial arts career fully. He moves in with a well-known martial art instructor named James Yim Lee. Together, they open a new martial arts school in Oakland, California. His first child, Brandon Lee, is born on February 1st, 1965 AD. Bruce Lee gained a measure of celebrity with his role in the television series The Green Hornet, which aired in 26 episodes from 1966 to 1967. In the show, which was based on 1930s radio program, Bruce Lee displayed his acrobatic fighting style as the Hornet's sidekick, Kato. The Green Hornet was the first time that Kung Fu had been seen in the West, beside in the movie theater in Chinatown district. It should also be noted that Bruce Lee had to slow down his fight movement because they became a blur while being filmed, and the show also used slow motion to play the fight scenes so that they could capture the full effect of Bruce Lee's skill. Bruce Lee has an impressive punching speed. When Bruce Lee was at a distance of 3 feet away, he could react and punch in just 0.05 of a second, that is 0.05 of 1 second. Bruce Lee had to slow himself down on screen because the cameras could not even detect his speedy punches. In early footage of him in the Green Hornet, many scenes had to be completed, redone so his fellow actors could react more efficiently for the scenes. When they were initially playback, Bruce Lee's punches were so fast it looked like his opponents simply fell over for no reason. Bruce Lee had difficulty finding acting jobs after the cancellation of the Green Hornet, and he began supplementing his income by giving private Jeet Kune Do lessons to Hollywood stars, including Steve McQueen. He felt that his traditional style of Wing Chun wasn't suited for the chaotic street fight scenes he was used to performing in the film and TV. In 1967 AD, he established the Zhong Fang Kung Fu Institute to train people of all classes, age and race in martial art and the philosophy behind the art. His new style focused more on speed, flexibility, practicality and efficiency. Jeet Kune Do translates as the way of incepting fist. On April 19, 1969 AD, he and his wife Linda Lee welcomed their second child, daughter Sinon. In 1969 AD, during a routine training session, Bruce Lee injured his back due to improper warm-ups before the start of his routine. Initially, Bruce Lee was told that he would not be able to walk properly and might not be able to practice martial arts anymore. While performing his usual weight training exercise with a 125-pound barbell in the morning, Bruce Lee damaged his fourth sacral nerve, and to his shock, the doctors told him that he could never do Kung Fu again. Determined to recover, Bruce Lee began searching for a cure, going through several weeks of therapy and designing a bed that would help treat his injury. After some time, Bruce Lee began training again and regularly took medication for his condition, but would still suffer from chronic back pain. Bruce Lee injured his back and the doctors suggested him to discontinue Kung Fu. However, Bruce Lee, in order to prove the doctors wrong, recovered and became stronger and faster. Around 1970 AD, Bruce Lee spent a great deal being involved in various films and TV production, either in supporting roles or as a fight scene choreographer. Frustrated that he was unable to obtain a starring role and establish himself, Bruce Lee decided to return to Hong Kong. Around 1971 AD, Bruce Lee returned to Hong Kong after struggling to make it big in Hollywood. Upon arrival, he was greeted by multiple reporters and was requested to appear on talk shows because of his role of Kato. His newfound fame in Asia was a surprise to him. He did, however, become a huge success when moving to Hong Kong. The newfound fame led him to search for future film ventures in Hong Kong. Shaw Brothers Studio and Golden Harvest signed him on as a lead in two films, The Big Boss and Fist of Fury 1972, which were hugely successful in Asian cinema. Within 3 weeks of its release, The Big Boss smashed all box office records, earning over Hong Kong dollar 3 million. Fist of Fury was the film that started the association of nunchakus with Bruce Lee. The film's success would also change Bruce Lee and the Hong Kong film industry. His second film in Hong Kong, Fist of Fury, was filmed in 6 weeks on a budget of $100,000. It would end up breaking the Big Boss box office records in only 4 weeks. After the film, Bruce Lee decided he wanted to create his own production company. So he formed Concord Production with Raymond Chow. He decided he wanted to write and direct the film he was in, and he wanted to receive Speed of the Prophets. Bruce Lee wrote, produced, directed, and starred in A Way of Dragon. He also scouted the location, casted, chose the wardrobe, and choreographed the fight scenes. Essentially, he did almost everything for the film. This was the first Hong Kong film to be shot in Europe. Bruce Lee spent over 45 hours on his fight scene with Chuck Norris, and the film would break the box office record he had just set with Fist of Fury within 3 weeks. Bruce Lee agreed and starred in Warner Brothers' Enter the Dragon, in which he would play the lead in what would be his most famous film, but unfortunately would be his last as well. In the film Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee briefly worked with a young Jackie Chan for a scene. In the movie, Jackie Chan plays the role of a guard who quickly jumps into the frame and grabs Bruce Lee from behind. However, Jackie Chan's role in the film was only a brief, as his character was killed off immediately by Bruce Lee. Enter the Dragon 1973 was the first joint venture between Hong Kong and US-based production companies, and it became a worldwide hit, thrusting Lee into an international movie stardom. Tragically, he died 6 days before the film's release. Bruce Lee brought an imperishable physique to the screen that was decades ahead of its time. But because his role required so much physicality, he would drench with sweat while filming. And apparently, the martial art pioneer loaded the sweat stains that would show up on his clothing as a result. To prevent this, Bruce Lee had his sweat glands surgically removed in 1972-80. In May 10, 1973-80, Bruce Lee was rushed to hospital after collapsing during post-production work on Enter the Dragon. He had suffered from headaches and seizures due to swelling of the brain. On July 20, 1973, Bruce Lee had complained about headache on the day of his death and was given a painkiller by Betty Ting Pai, an actress who claimed to be Bruce Lee's mistress. Bruce Lee went to rest but did not turn up to the meeting as planned. Concerned, they found Bruce Lee but were unable to wake him. Bruce Lee was unable to be revived and was later pronounced dead before arriving in hospital. It is believed that Bruce Lee may have suffered an allergic reaction. Bruce Lee dies. According to an interview conducted in 2008-80, Ting Pei stated that they were last with Bruce Lee before he was admitted to hospital on the day of his death. Ting Pei stated that Bruce Lee did not wake up from his sleep and died suddenly in his apartment complex. Bruce Lee and Betty Ting Pei first met at a hotel in Hong Kong in 1972-80, where they were introduced by a film producer Raymond Chow Man Wai. Betty Ting Pei stated that Bruce Lee was the first man that she has ever truly respected and admired during the time that they were seeing each other. On July 20, 1973-80, just 1 month before the premiere of Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee died in Hong Kong, China at the age of 32. The official cause of his sudden and utterly unexpected death was a brain edema, found in an autopsy to have been caused by a strange reaction to the prescription painkiller he was reportedly taking for a back injury. Bruce Lee's collapse had to do with heat stroke, since his stint in an overheated recording studio was compounded by a lack of sweat gland that prevented his body from cooling off naturally. Heat stroke can also cause swelling in the brain, much like was found during Lee's autopsy. Controversy surrounded Bruce Lee's death from the beginning, as someone claimed he had been murdered. There was also the belief that he might have been cursed. More rumors of the so-called curse circulated in 1993 AD, when his son Brandon Lee was killed under mysterious circumstances during the filming of The Crow. The family curse theory resurfaced when Bruce Lee's 28-year-old son Brandon, who had followed in his father's footsteps to become an actor, died in an accidental shooting on the set of the movie The Crow on March 31, 1993 AD. His son, Brandon Lee, was buried next to his father at Seattle's Lakeview Cemetery. On July 31, 1973 AD, Bruce Lee was buried at Lakeview Cemetery, Seattle, in his wife Linda's hometown and the location in which they first met. Bruce Lee stood 1.72 meter in height, or 5 feet 6 inches. Bruce Lee was known for his great philosophy and belief that one should not only have a healthy mind, but a body as well, which involves a complicated eating routine. Generally, Bruce Lee was known to avoid processed food and stuck with more balanced food from Asian cuisine rather than Western one. Portion sizes were also particularly important to him, as he would consume around 4 to 5 small meals in a day with the occasional fruits for snack. Bruce Lee's daily workout include 2000 kick, 5000 punches, 200 leaning twist, 200 frog kick, 100 sit-up, twist and 100 leg raise. Bruce Lee was known to ingest a particularly potent form of Nepalese hashish, a practice that only increased after his serious 1970 AD back injury and chronic pain. Traces of cannabis were found in Lee's stomach in the autopsy following his death. Despite his quick reaction and insightful precision, Bruce Lee actually had a terrible eyesight. This meant that he wore large glasses all his life and was even one of the first person to ever try out contact lenses. But because they were uncomfortable, he discontinued the uses. He practiced 5,000 punches a day. He had his sweat glands removed from his armpits. In addition to being the best martial art practitioner in the world, Bruce Lee was also an amazingly talented sketch artist. Despite the fact that he was the most lethal fighter, he still carried a .367 Magnum in his holster for safety. His insatiable quest for knowledge and learning prompted him to have a library of his own, housing over 2,000 books. Bruce Lee could not swim at all. When Bruce was young, he pushed his sister Phoebe into a swimming pool as a joke, and his sister Phoebe responded by holding his head underwater until he promised never to do it again. From then on, he never went into a swimming pool again. Bruce Lee had a lot of skills, but he was never a good driver at all. He used to charge $275 an hour for martial art lessons. He was known to chew cannabis, the potent Nepali hashish. He was the first Asian American actor to ever have a lead role in Hollywood films. He had a trademark fighting style that involved lightning-quick movements, paving the way for many of the moves you'll find in the mixed martial arts MMA scene today. The more facts about Bruce Lee that people learn, the more they begin to realize just how iconic he was as a man, an actor, a martial artist, and a philosopher. He could do 50 one-arm chin-ups. There are also stories of Bruce Lee doing push-up with 125 pounds of weight on his back, which is even more remarkable since he only weighted around 130 pounds. Thank you.